A bipartisan bill would temporarily free news publishers from antitrust laws.
The bill, co-sponsored by Republican John Kennedy and Democrat and 2020 presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar, is meant to help newspapers bargain with big tech companies for digital revenue.
So we want to bring in, joining us now is News Media Alliance President CEO David Chavern. Thank you so much for joining us to talk a little bit more about this. I want to start by asking you about the study released by News Media Alliance on how Google benefits from news content. What did you find?
Well, what we found is that news content is not only really valuable to the public, it's valuable to the platforms as well. The conclusion of that study was that it results in something like $4.7 billion in revenue to Google in 2018. But the bigger issue is that it is really valuable forms of content to everybody in the system, including the platforms.
A Google spokesperson responded to this study saying it doesn't take into account the value Google provides to publishers' websites. What's your response to that?
Listen, this was a very professionally done study using very serious economists. If Google has a different number, I'd be happy to hear it, but they haven't provided one, so we have to go with what we are able to determine. But the bottom line is that news content is extremely valuable to the platforms, as well as to the broader public.
So let's move on to this House Judiciary hearing on digital platforms. You're one of the people testifying at the hearing. What will you be speaking about?
We're going to be talking about the role that the platforms play in standing between news publishers and our audience, news readers in the public, and the fact that essentially the platforms act as regulators of the news business. They determine everything about our business, including whether we make money, whether content is delivered, to whom it's delivered, really everything about the experience. And that really there's no check on that regulatory power. And all we're asking for is for the ability of news publishers to be able to band together to collectively negotiate a better outcome with the major tech platforms. We're not asking that they be regulated or broken up, just really for the government to leave us alone.
And so then how is this shift towards digital news affecting news organizations? Because it's an interesting discussion, and as we've been pointing out, it's a rare occasion where both Democrats and Republicans are on the same page around this.
I think it's truly fascinating when you consider, and the study sort of indicates how much of the business model and the revenue is based on the product. Not that we want to be the story, but based on the products that we produce, right? And
Absolutely.
You're right, they are gatekeepers, and it's, when you search, maybe you go to Google to search, sometimes, changing a word, inventors to inventor, brings up a whole different list of information, right? And that controls, what people find when they are searching
for content they consume.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that's clear is that major platforms, Google and Facebook in particular, are now take the vast bulk of all the digital ad revenue. Now, that ad revenue is sold around content, other people's content, including our own. And what we're asking for is the ability to negotiate at least a sustainable engagement with them. Listen, I'm not a all-over critic of the platforms. They're amazing distribution systems, but also they have tremendous power over news, and there needs to be some balance, some check on that power.
So you're looking for a 4-year antitrust exemption that would allow news publishers to negotiate, for example, with Google and Facebook so that the advertising dollars and the content is equally or fairly distributed.
Yeah, it's about money, of course, advertising dollars and other revenue. It's also about data. They tend to hoard data about our own readers. It's about algorithms. They decide what news I see and how it's different than the news you see. And they can change those algorithms at any time. And it's about our brand. Our brands get suppressed on these platforms so that people get very confused about where news is coming from and whether it comes from a trusted source or not.
So, David, I have a quick question about this, and it asks to take a little bit of wider view of this. Before the advent of Google and Facebook, how instrumental have Google and Facebook been to the news business? In other words, is it a question of we really can't live without them now that they're here?
Right.
Or would you, if in a perfect world, would they not exist?
Clearly, they need our content,
right?
But also, they provide the information highway. They,
exactly.
Allow
Always
the
very
audience
good to let Anne-Marie articulate my questions for me, because I struggle.
Well, the audience for news is much broader now than it ever was before.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They have been actually key to the fact that there are more people consuming more hard news than ever by a lot. Right? Or interestingly, think of it this way: my members, their audience for news is larger than it ever was in peak print era by multiples. Yet they make much less money than they ever did. So, in a sense, the platforms have been tremendous at distributing news, and that is an absolute good. What we need is some balance in the economic relationship, so at least some of the return goes back to the people who create the news content.
Yeah,
it's hard to argue with that.
No, it is, and it's interesting because, David, we used to say, "Oh, news is dying," right? Even when I came into the news business, I remember I came from another career. My boss said to me, "Why are you going into the news business? It's not going to be around for long." And yet, as more and more people are consuming news, the point that you made about making less money is ironic, because it's not dying, but it is because you're not able to sustain, because the revenues are not there.
Yeah, exactly. You know, one thing that people always say that's absolutely wrong is, for example, that millennials don't consume news. Actually, millennials consume much more news than we did at their age because it's available. It's accessible to them easily, and people love news content. But there has to be some return for the fact that we create this content that people want and need and consume a lot, but yet less and less of the revenue goes back to the people who create that content.
It's a really fascinating discussion. We could keep talking about this for some time. Maybe we should do a podcast with you. But David, thank you so much for appearing with us. We appreciate it. And we should mention that David will be testifying before the House Judiciary Antitrust Subcommittee at about 2 p.m. Eastern today. And you can watch that right here on CBSN. Thank you, David.
Thank you.